The silence after betrayal has a crushing physical weight. It settles like packed earth over something buried alive. Elena Vance stood motionless in the penthouse foyer, the cavernous space echoing with the absence of the man who'd just walked out. 10 years, measured in polished marble, curated art, and meticulously maintained appearances, dissolved into sterile emptiness. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window was a ghost in designer silk, the perfect, poised wife, now a discarded ornament. The scent of his cloying new cologne lingered, a bitter reminder. Her fingers traced the single strand of pearls at her throat, cool and heavy, an heirloom whispering of a different kind of strength, layered and quiet. They felt like armor now, the only real thing in this monument to his ambition. Outside, the city glittered, a kingdom he'd built, a cage she'd inhabited. A single, ridiculously expensive crystal tumbler sat untouched on a side table, the amber liquid inside catching the track lighting, promising nothing but false warmth. The label, spat weeks ago amidst gilded crowds, echoed in the hollow space, gold digger. It coiled, cold and venomous, in the pit of her stomach. But beneath the numbness, beneath the suffocating weight of the silence and the insult, something else stirred, something hard, something waiting. The pearls felt suddenly less like an heirloom, and more like the first link in a chain of her own making. Chapter 1. Silence has a weight after betrayal. It presses down, not like a blanket, but like packed earth over something buried alive. This penthouse, Damien's monument to success, all cold marble, sharp angles, and views that stretched emptily over the city, amplified it. 10 years, a decade measured in polished surfaces, impeccable appearances, and a growing chasm where warmth used to reside. Now, the silence wasn't just the absence of his presence, it was the void left by the shattering of the fragile illusion we'd called a marriage. I traced the rim of a ridiculously expensive crystal tumbler, untouched. The amber liquid inside caught the sterile track lighting, glittering with a false promise, much like Damien's vows. My reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window was a ghost, pale, blurred at the edges, dressed in the uniform of the perfect CEO's wife, silk blouse, tailored trousers, hair perfectly subdued. A trophy gathering dust. The memory slammed into me, unbidden and visceral. 3 weeks ago, the scent of Damien's cloying cologne, something new and aggressively masculine he'd started wearing. I'd found it nestled in his discarded suit jacket pocket, a velvet box. Not for me. My birthday had passed unnoticed months before. Inside, nestled on black satin, lay a diamond tennis bracelet. Gaudy, ostentatious, a twin, almost, to the simpler one he'd given me for our 5th anniversary, now languishing in my jewelry box like a forgotten relic. The stones had winked at me, cold and accusatory. Confrontation was a messy, inelegant affair I'd avoided for years. But that day, the weight of the box, the sheer audacity of it hidden here, in the pocket of a jacket I would send for cleaning, it unlocked something brittle. I'd found him in his home office, the sanctum where deals were brokered, and apparently infidelities managed. He'd barely looked up from his screen. Damien. My voice sounded alien, thin. His eyes flickered towards me, impatient, already dismissing me before I spoke. I placed the box on the polished mahogany beside his keyboard. The click of the lid snapping open was obscenely loud. His gaze dropped, a flicker of annoyance, not guilt, never guilt. What's this? Found it, in your jacket. The words were stones dropping into a still pond. He sighed, the long-suffering sigh reserved for irrational subordinates or inconvenient delays. It's for Celeste, her birthday, a small token of appreciation for her work on the Meridian deal. Don't make a scene, Elena. It's business, business. The word coated my tongue like ash. Celeste Vance, his vice president of acquisitions. 32, razor-sharp, ambitious, with a smile that never quite reached her calculating eyes. She'd been a fixture at company events, her laughter a little too loud near Damien, her hand lingering on his arm a fraction too long. I'd ignored it, buried it, told myself it was paranoia, the price of being married to a man whose empire demanded constant attention. Now, the diamond bracelet mocked my willful blindness. The scene shifted, overlaying the sterile office. A week after the bracelet, the Blackwood Global Annual Gala, a sea of diamonds and designer gowns, forced laughter, and the clinking of glasses that sounded like coins. I was playing my part, a serene smile plastered on, a phantom drifting through the throng. Then, near the ice sculpture melting into obscurity, Celeste materialized. Her dress was crimson tight, demanding attention. The new bracelet sparkled viciously on her wrist, as she lifted a champagne flute. "Elena," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you look composed." As always, her eyes raked over my understated navy gown, my grandmother's single strand of pearls. "Must be nice, living off Damien's success without lifting a finger. The ultimate gold digger's dream, HM." The insult, delivered with a venomous smile amidst the glittering crowd, stole my breath. It wasn't just the words, it was the utter contempt, the certainty of her victory. My gaze flickered past her, searching the crowd for Damien. He stood nearby, deep in conversation with a senator, oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant. He didn't turn, didn't intervene. His silence was the final brick in the wall sealing my humiliation. I hadn't responded, couldn't. Words felt like shards of glass in my throat. I'd simply turned and walked away, the pearls cool and heavy against my suddenly burning skin, the label gold digger echoing in the cavernous silence within me. That night, Damien hadn't come home. A shudder racked me, pulling me back to the oppressive present of the penthouse. The tumbler was cold in my hand. Gold digger. The irony choked me. I'd come into this marriage with my own modest inheritance, carefully invested, always kept separate, a quiet insistence on a sliver of independence. Damien had tolerated with amused condescension. He'd built his empire, my contributions, emotional or otherwise, were irrelevant footnotes. Celeste's sneer had crystallized the truth. In their eyes I was decoration, expendable, a parasite, clinging to Damien's wealth. The numbness that followed the gala was profound, a thick, insulating fog. I moved through the days like an automaton, charity lunches I no longer cared about, appointments with designers for clothes I didn't want, overseeing a household staff, managing an empty fortress. Damien moved out officially a week after the gala, a terse email from his assistant, detailing the logistics. No discussion, no apology, just an efficient severance package for a failed acquisition. The fog began to lift only when the letter arrived, thick, expensive parchment, bearing the crest of a law firm I vaguely recognized, Havisham and Crouch, my mother's estate. Elena Vance, a woman as quiet and enigmatic as the pearls she always wore. Her passing 6 months ago had been a deep private grief, overshadowed even then by the growing chill in my marriage. Sorting her affairs had felt like one more insurmountable task in my paralyzed state. But the letter was a final summons. The last of her effects were ready for collection. Her cottage in the sleepy coastal town of Seabridge awaited my attention. Seabridge was a world away from Damien's steel and glass domain. 3 hours by train, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to rolling hills, then finally to the salt-kissed air, and the cry of gulls. My mother's cottage, whispering pines, perched on a cliff edge, weathered wood and climbing roses, overlooking the restless gray expanse of the ocean. It smelled of beeswax, old paper, and the sea, a scent that instantly pricked my eyes. Her absence was a physical ache in the small, cozy rooms. For days I simply existed there. Wrapped in one of her old cardigans, I drank tea from her chipped floral cups, watched the waves crash against the rocks below. The silence here was different. It wasn't oppressive, it was vast, ancient and strangely comforting. It held space for grief, for the hollowed-out feeling left by Damien's abandonment. The task of sorting felt monumental. Boxes filled the small study, crammed with books on botany and obscure history, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, collections of seashells, and oddly shaped stones. My mother, always private, almost reclusive after my father's early death, had been a curator of quiet things. I worked methodically, the rhythm of sorting, the tactile reality of paper and fabric, a grounding counterpoint to the emotional chaos inside. It was inside an unassuming, slightly battered wooden chest, tucked away beneath a stack of old National Geographic magazines, that I found it. Not jewels, not stocks and bonds, at least, not obviously. Wrapped in soft faded indigo velvet, was a simple object, a pocket watch. Its brass casing was worn smooth in places, the glass face slightly cloudy. It felt heavy, solid, reassuring in my palm. Engraved on the back, in delicate script, "For Eleanor, time reveals all. With love, Papa." Beneath the velvet, nestled in a compartment I almost missed, was a sheaf of documents, not the expected will or property deeds. These were different, thick, legal paper, dense with small type, letters from banks I'd never heard of, in Zurich, Singapore, the Cayman Islands, statements detailing holdings, not just the cottage and a modest savings account. These documents spoke of significant, diverse investments, renewable energy startups, rare earth mineral holdings, substantial stakes in emerging tech firms, and old-world manufacturing, even a sizable art portfolio, managed not by my mother directly, but by a discreet trust. The figures made my head swim. This wasn't modest independence, this was quiet, formidable wealth, generational wealth, carefully shielded. The shock was a physical blow. I sank onto the worn Persian rug, the documents spilling around me like fallen leaves. My mother, Eleanor Vance, the quiet gardener, the woman who preferred muddy boots to boardrooms, the recluse, a shrewd secret investor, the woman who gently discouraged me from pursuing finance, saying it was too harsh a world. Pearls, not diamonds, Elena, she'd often murmured, touching the strand at her neck. Value accrued in layers, unseen, strength and quiet resilience. I'd thought she meant character. Now, holding the cold brass of the watch, and the damningly impressive financial statements, I understood she'd meant literal strategy. She hadn't just lived quietly, she'd built quietly, fiercely, protecting herself, and ultimately me. A dry humorless laugh escaped me. Gold digger, Celeste's sneer echoed. If only she knew, if only Damien knew. The numbness began to recede, replaced by a slow simmering heat that started deep in my core. It wasn't just anger at their betrayal, their casual cruelty, it was fury at myself, for playing small, for believing the role they'd assigned me, for letting my mother's legacy, her quiet strength, lie dormant while I withered in Damien's gilded shadow. I picked up the pocket watch, its weight was an anchor. I found the winding key tucked into the velvet lining. With deliberate, almost ritualistic movements, I inserted it, and turned. A soft, precise click 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 filled the quiet study. The sound was steady, insistent. It marked time moving forward, time I'd wasted, time I could reclaim. Later, standing at the cliff's edge, the wind whipping strands of hair free from its careful knot, I watched the relentless ocean. The vastness didn't diminish me anymore. It mirrored the potential suddenly unfurling inside. My mother's pearls felt warm against my throat, a tangible connection. Pearls, not diamonds, value accrued in layers, strength and quiet resilience. The fog was gone, burned away by the revelation. In its place was a cold, clear focus. The ledger in my mind, the one that had tallied every slight, every dismissal, every icy silence from Damien, every venomous barb from Celeste, flipped open. But it wasn't just a record of debts owed to my heart, it was a ledger of dignity stolen. And the inheritance in my hands wasn't just money, it was ammunition, quiet, patient, devastating ammunition. I needed help navigating this hidden arsenal. The documents pointed to the executor, Mr. Alistair Finch of Finch and Associates, a discreet firm in the city. Discretion was paramount. Damien couldn't know, Celeste couldn't suspect. This had to be a surgical strike, planned in the shadows, executed with the same ruthless precision Damien used in his boardroom takeovers. Back in the city a few days later, the penthouse felt even more alien. A mausoleum. I avoided the empty spaces, retreating instead to the neglected rooftop terrace. Once, it had been my sanctuary, a place for potted herbs and climbing jasmine. Now, it was a testament to neglect. Weeds choked the planters. The rose bushes my mother had gifted me years ago, hardy, old-fashioned varieties, with deep fragrance, were spindly, choked by bindweed, their few remaining leaves spotted with disease. A single stubborn bud, tightly furled and blood-red, clung to a thorny cane. I knelt on the cold stone, ignoring the damp seeping through my trousers. The city sprawled below, Damien's kingdom of steel and ambition. Carefully, I began pulling weeds, my hands encountering sharp thorns that pricked my skin. Tiny beads of blood welled up. I didn't flinch. The sting was real, grounding. It mirrored the sharper pain inside, but it was pain I was choosing to engage with now. I worked silently, clearing the bindweed from around the base of the rosebush. The thorns bit, drawing more blood. I wiped it absently on my trousers, focusing on the task, freeing the roots, giving it light. As I worked, the plan solidified. Not destruction for its own sake. That was Damien's way. No, reshaping, reclaiming, using the very tools of his world, finance, strategy, leverage, but guided by a different compass. My mother's compass, quiet, patient, unseen until the moment of revelation. Time reveals all. My fingers closed around the pocket watch in my cardigan pocket. Its steady ticking was a counterpoint to the frantic pulse of the city below. I wound it again, feeling the tiny gears engage. Click, click. Time was no longer my enemy, it was my ally. The meeting with Mr. Finch was set in an unassuming building in the financial district, far from Blackwood Global's gleaming tower. His office was all dark wood, leather, and the quiet hum of efficient wealth management. Mr. Finch himself was a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed, with eyes like chips of gray flint, behind rimless glasses. He had the air of someone who had seen empires rise and fall, and remained unmoved. "Miss Vance," he greeted me, his voice a dry rustle of parchment. "I was deeply sorry to hear of your mother's passing. She was a remarkable client, unconventional, but possessed of remarkable foresight." He gestured to a chair. "I understand you've reviewed the trust documents." "I have, Mr. Finch." My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. I placed the worn velvet pouch, containing the pocket watch, on his immaculate desk. "She left me this too." A flicker of recognition, perhaps respect, passed through his eyes. "Ah. The chronometer." She considered it the key. "A reminder," she said, "that true power lies not in noise, but in perfect timing." He steepled his fingers. "How may Finch and Associates serve you, Miss Vance?" "Income management. Portfolio diversification. We can provide a very comfortable life, entirely independent." I met his gaze directly. The numbness was gone, replaced by a bone-deep certainty. The image of Celeste's sneer, Damien's indifferent back, the blood welling from the rose thorns, the relentless ticking of the watch, they coalesced into a single unwavering purpose. "No, Mr. Finch." I leaned forward slightly, the pearls cool against my skin. "I want to use it all. Every resource, every holding, every connection this firm possesses." I paused, the silence in the room deepening, filled only by the soft, insistent tick-tick-tick of the pocket watch, lying between us on the polished wood. "It's time," I said, the words dropping into the quiet, with the weight of stones, "to dismantle Damien Blackwood's empire." His expression didn't change. No shock, no disapproval, just a slow, deliberate nod. The gray flint eyes assessed me anew, seeing past the silk blouse, and the carefully composed face, seeing the resolve, the cold fire, the quiet fury honed by betrayal, and awakened by legacy. "I see, Mr. Finch murmured. He picked up the pocket watch, his touch surprisingly gentle on the worn brass. He wound it once, the tiny clicks echoing sharply in the still room, then placed it back before me. "Then we have work to do, Miss Vance. Consider Finch and Associates entirely at your disposal. Where shall we begin?" The watch ticked on, loudly now, marking the end of one life, and the precise patient beginning of another. The earth had shifted. The seed of vengeance, watered by betrayal, and nourished by hidden strength, had been planted. Now, it was time to cultivate. Chapter 2. The city, viewed from the sterile heights of Finch and Associates, looked different now. Not just a landscape of Damien's dominion, but a chessboard. The buildings weren't monolithic testaments to ego. They were assets, liabilities, pressure points waiting to be identified. Finch's office, smelling of aged leather and expensive paper, became my war room. The worn brass pocket watch rested on the polished mahogany desk between us, its steady tick-tick-tick the metronome of my new reality. Finch was a revelation, dry, precise, Utterly devoid of unnecessary emotion, he possessed a mind like a scalpel, and a network of contacts that spider-webbed through global finance with near-invisible threads. He didn't question my objective. He assessed it, dissected it, and began formulating the strategy with the detached efficiency of a master surgeon. My mother, it seemed, hadn't just entrusted him with her wealth, she'd entrusted him with understanding the potential for its use. He saw in me, perhaps, the echo of Elena Vance's quiet ferocity finally awakened. Blackwood Global, Finch began, unrolling a complex organizational chart across the desk, weighted down by an onyx paperweight. A classic house of cards, Miss Vance, built on leverage and Damian Blackwood's considerable, if increasingly erratic, charisma. His finger, bony and precise, tapped a subsidiary, Meridian Holdings, their recent acquisition, spearheaded, I believe, by Miss Celeste Vance. He didn't look up, but the slight pause before her name spoke volumes. Aggressively over-leveraged, the cornerstone of their current expansion, and its most vulnerable point. He slid another dossier towards me. Blackwood himself is heavily invested personally in several vanity projects, the downtown Elysium Towers, the Nexus's tech incubator, flashes of brilliance diluted by ego and poor due diligence. They rely heavily on a single supplier chain for their core manufacturing arm, Viridian Industries, a chain precariously dependent on, he named a politically unstable region, and susceptible to disruption. The sheer volume of information was dizzying, the intricate web of Damien's empire laid bare in stark financial terms. Finch guided me through it, his explanations clear, concise, devoid of jargon meant to intimidate. He wasn't teaching me finance, he was teaching me warfare using the language of balance sheets and stock tickers. I learned about shell companies, intricate nests of legal entities designed to obscure ownership. I learned about hostile bids, poison pills, and the delicate art of whispering doubts into the ears of key investors. My mother's legacy wasn't just money, it was access to this shadow world, a world Damien operated in with bluster, but one Finch navigated with silent lethal grace. Patience, Miss Vance, Finch would murmur, noticing the intensity in my gaze, the white-knuckled grip I sometimes had on the edge of his desk. Rushing reveals intent, we accumulate quietly, we destabilize subtly, we allow the inherent weaknesses, magnified by our discrete pressure, to do most of the work, like water eroding stone. Patience, the word resonated with the ticking watch, it became my mantra, a discipline harder to master than any financial model. The facade required its own brand of exhausting patience. I remained Elena Blackwood, the quietly discarded wife. I attended the necessary, soul-crushing charity luncheons, the symphony ball, the children's hospital gala, events Damien still graced with Celeste shimmering on his arm like a particularly sharp diamond. The first encounter was at the Museum of Modern Art fundraiser. I wore simple black, my mother's pearls my only adornment. Damien and Celeste held court near a garish abstract sculpture, Celeste's laughter ringing out, artificially bright, her gaze snagged on me across the room, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by that familiar contemptuous amusement. She leaned into Damien, whispering something that made his mouth tighten almost imperceptibly, before he offered me a curt, dismissive nod. No words, just the silent reaffirmation of my irrelevance. Celeste's eyes, however, lingered, sharp and assessing, checking for cracks, I thought, the cold fury a familiar pulse beneath my ribs, looking for the gold digger drowning in despair. I met her gaze, held it for a fraction of a second longer than comfortable, my expression as smooth and unreadable as the pearls at my throat. I offered no smile, no flicker of pain, simply an acknowledgement, cool and detached, before turning away to examine a stark black and white photograph. Their diamonds glittered like ice chips, I observed inwardly. My pearls felt warm, a secret armor forged in Seabridge salt air. Maintaining the facade meant brief, unavoidable exchanges, divorce logistics handled through lawyers, but occasionally, paths crossed. Once picking up the last of my personal items from the penthouse, a box containing old sketchbooks, a faded university hoodie, things Damien would deem worthless, I encountered him in the foyer. He looked harried, a sheen of sweat on his brow, despite the penthouse's climate control. Rumors of supplier issues at Viridian were already circulating. Elena, his voice was brusque. Leaving, he gestured vaguely at the box in my arms. Just collecting the remnants, I replied, my voice level, devoid of accusation or plea. It was simply a statement of fact. He frowned, his gaze sweeping over me, perhaps seeking the expected signs of devastation, puffy eyes, trembling hands, finding none, only calm composure, seemed to unsettle him. Right, well, the doorman will hail you a cab. He turned towards his study, then paused. You're managing all right? The question held no real concern, merely a perfunctory social obligation, an afterthought. Perfectly, thank you, Damien. The words were cool, polite, offering nothing. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable, confusion, perhaps irritation, before he vanished into his sanctuary. Managing, I thought, carrying the box out into the elevator lobby. Oh, Damien, you have no idea how well I'm managing. The real work happened in Finch's office, through encrypted channels, in the quiet hours of the night spent poring over reports in the small study of my new unassuming apartment. My mother's funds flowed like hidden rivers through a network of shell companies, Finch meticulously constructed, Aurora Holdings, Seabridge Ventures, Peregrine Investments, innocuous names acquiring quiet, strategic stakes, a controlling interest in the small, innovative firm that supplied a critical patented component to Viridian Industries' main competitor, a significant loan, at favorable terms, offered to a struggling but ethically run materials supplier Damien had recently squeezed out, quiet purchases of Blackwood Global stock, during minor dips, accumulating shares like grains of sand, insignificant individually, potentially decisive en masse. Finch was the master weaver, a carefully placed rumor here, a subtly leaked analyst report questioning Meridian's solvency there, a discreet lunch with a major institutional investor expressing concerns about Blackwood's personal investments draining corporate focus. The pressure was applied, not with a sledgehammer, but with the relentless invisible force of shifting tectonic plates. I watched the financial news, a new kind of detachment settling over me, seeing Damien's face, still projecting confidence, but with tighter lines around his eyes, a sharper edge to his pronouncements, seeing Celeste less frequently beside him, her public smiles looking increasingly strained, her diamond bracelets flashing with a desperate brightness. The facade was cracking under the weight of their own making, and our unseen pressure. My neglected rooftop terrace became my refuge, my tangible connection to the patience required. The city air was grimy, but I started tending the rose bushes again. It was slow, dirty work. The bindweed had strangled roots, thorns tore at my gloves and my skin. I pruned back the dead wood ruthlessly, the snip of the shears echoing the decisive cuts Finch made in Blackwood's financial structure. I fed the depleted soil, watered deeply, whispering to the struggling plants words I might have whispered to myself. Hold on, grow, the light is coming. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating session tracking Damien's attempts to secure emergency financing for Elysium Tower, I knelt amidst the pots, sweat beading on my forehead. My hand slipped, and a particularly vicious thorn gouged deep into my palm. Blood welled, bright red against the dark soil. I didn't recoil. I watched it drip onto the earth around the base of the most stubborn rose cane, the one bearing that single tight red bud. The pain was sharp, clean, a reminder that creation, even the act of nurturing something back to life, could draw blood. Resilience isn't pretty, I thought, pressing a clean cloth to the wound. It's gritty, thorny, and sometimes bleeds. The encounter with Liam Reed happened at the Devereux auction house. Finch had identified a minor, failing art gallery as a potential pressure point. Its owner owed significant debts to a Blackwood subsidiary, and was desperate. Acquiring his debt cheaply could give us leverage later. I was there anonymously, registered under one of Finch's holding companies, to observe the auction of the gallery owner's final assets, assessing his desperation level. I sat near the back, shrouded in the dimness, a nondescript file of financials on my lap. During a lull in the bidding for a collection of mediocre landscapes, I rose to stretch my legs, needing a moment away from the stifling air thick with perfume and greed. Turning a corner near the refreshment alcove, I collided solidly with someone emerging. Hot liquid seared through the thin silk of my blouse, soaking the file in my hands. Coffee, strong black, and now liberally staining the confidential documents. Oh God, I'm so sorry. The voice was male, warm, genuinely contrite. Clumsy idiot, are you all right? That's hot. I looked up, blinking against the sudden brightness of the alcove. He was tall, leanly built, wearing a charcoal suit that wasn't aggressively expensive but impeccably cut. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his hands through it, but it was his eyes that caught me, a clear intelligent gray, wide with concern, holding none of the predatory sharpness I was accustomed to in Damien's circles. He was already pulling a surprisingly soft, navy blue cashmere scarf from around his neck. Here, quick, before it soaks through. Without waiting for permission, he gently pressed the scarf against the spreading stain on my blouse, then started dabbing carefully at the sodden file. It's fine, I managed, flustered by the suddenness, the intimacy of a stranger mopping coffee off me. The financials were ruined, but they were coated. The real damage was to my composure. I caught the faint scent of him, clean linen, cedar, and a hint of graphite. Fine? I've just baptized you and your paperwork in Ethiopian dark roast, he said, a rueful lopsided smile touching his lips. He stopped dabbing, and held up the stained scarf and the dripping file. Definitely not fine. Can I replace the scarf, or the documents, or perhaps your dry cleaning bill? His gaze met mine directly, no guile, just earnest apology mixed with a flicker of wry humor. No really, I insisted, finding my voice, pulling the damp file back. Accidents happen. The scarf, it's salvageable. It felt soft and expensive in my hand, now stained with coffee and ink. He studied me for a second, those gray eyes perceptive. He saw the controlled fluster, the attempt at calm. He didn't push. If you're sure, he conceded, his voice gentle. He gestured towards the scarf. Keep it, a token of my profound clumsiness. Consider it a very damp apology. That slight self-deprecating smile again. He gave a small, courteous nod. Again, sincerely sorry. He turned and disappeared back into the auction room. Before I could respond, I stood there, clutching the coffee-stained file, and the damp fragrant scarf, my skin tingling where he'd briefly touched my arm. Liam Reed, I thought, the name surfacing from the auction catalog I'd glanced at earlier. An architect, known for restoring old libraries and community centers, not building soulless towers. A different creature entirely. The encounter left me oddly off balance, a brief warm current in the cold stream of my purpose. Returning to my seat, the auction had moved on. A small exquisite Art Deco bronze sculpture came up, elegant, fluid lines, utterly unlike the garish landscapes before it. It wasn't part of my target gallery's assets, it belonged to a different collection, but it was beautiful. On impulse, I raised my paddle for the opening bid. Almost immediately, another bid countered. I glanced. It was Liam Reed, seated a few rows ahead. He glanced back, caught my eye, and offered that same small, rueful smile, almost an apology, before turning his attention back to the auctioneer. We bid against each other, not aggressively, but steadily, the price climbing beyond the sculpture's likely market value. Was he doing it deliberately, testing me, or did he genuinely want it? His expression gave nothing away beyond calm focus. The bidding paused. The auctioneer looked between us. Against you, madam, at 22,000. I hesitated. It was beautiful, but it was a distraction. My real target, the gallery owner's desperation, was the goal. Letting this go could signal retreat, but persisting wasted resources. I met Liam's gaze again. He gave an almost imperceptible shrug, a tiny lift of his eyebrows. Your call, it seemed to say. I lowered my paddle. Out, I murmured. The auctioneer turned to Liam. Sir? At 22. Liam hesitated, just for a beat, his eyes flickering back to me. Then he shook his head slightly. Out. The sculpture went to a phone bidder. Liam didn't look disappointed. As the next lot was announced, a collection of uninspired modern prints belonging to my target gallery, Liam subtly raised his paddle again. He started bidding, driving the price up against another interested party. The prints were worthless. He was inflating the price for no reason. Or, was there a reason? The gallery owner, sweating visibly near the front, watched the rising bids with desperate hope. Higher bids meant more money to offset his debts, potentially delaying his collapse, making him less vulnerable to a quick, cheap takeover of his obligations. Liam's seemingly random bidding was in fact, a subtle shield for the man I needed to remain desperate. He knows, I thought, a jolt of surprise mingling with grudging respect. He doesn't know why I'm here, but he sensed the target. He wasn't bidding against me on the bronze, he was bidding for me on the prints, driving up the price to weaken my prey further, all without a single word exchanged. He finished, the prints selling for far more than they were worth to a baffled-looking collector. As the auctioneer moved on, Liam glanced back at me one last time, Not a smile this time, but a look of quiet understanding, a silent acknowledgement in those clear gray eyes. Then he turned away, a different kind of player, operating on a different board, yet his brief, unspoken intervention aligned perfectly with my hidden strategy. His eyes held blueprints, I realized, the warmth of the scarf still faint on my skin, not just balance sheets, a different kind of creation. Back on the terrace, weeks later, the results of our meticulous cultivation began to show. The reports from Finch were increasingly positive. Meridian Holdings was floundering under its debt burden, its stock price plummeting. Rumors of insolvency were no longer whispers but headlines. Damien was forced to divert resources from Elysium Tower and the Nexus Incubator to prop it up, stalling those projects and angering investors. The supplier issues for Viridian Industries worsened, causing production delays and contract penalties. Blackwood Global stock was on a slow, steady decline. The cracks were widening. Finch called me late one evening. His voice, usually dry as dust, held a rare note of satisfaction. The subsidiary, Miss Vance, Viridian, its primary lender, is calling in their loan. Blackwood lacks the liquidity to cover it without catastrophic asset sales or highly dilutive financing. They are critically exposed. I stood on the terrace, the city lights sprawling below, like a constellation of Damien's former glory. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth, and something else. I looked down at the rose bushes. The diligent pruning, feeding, and watering had worked. New healthy green shoots were pushing through the dark soil. The stubborn cane with the single bud, it had unfurled. A perfect deep crimson rose, velvety and fragrant, bloomed defiantly against the city's grimy backdrop. Its petals were slightly ragged at the edges, bearing the scars of neglect and the struggle to survive. Yet it was undeniably, breathtakingly alive. I touched a petal, soft and cool. The thorn that had drawn my blood weeks ago was now just a memory beneath the vibrant growth. Patience is a weapon honed in silence, I thought, echoing Finch's earlier words. The pocket watch in my pocket ticked steadily. The seed of vengeance, planted in the bitter soil of betrayal and nurtured by hidden strength, had taken root. The harvest, I knew, looking at the vulnerable bloom and the glittering wounded city, was imminent. The carefully cultivated cracks in Damien's empire were about to become a chasm, and I was ready to walk across it.
Chapter 3. The city held its breath. Or perhaps it was just me, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of Finch's discreet office, watching the storm clouds gather, not in the bruised sky overhead, but in the scrolling tickers on the muted financial news channel. The pressure we'd applied, patient and precise as water-wearing stone, had finally found the critical fissure. Viridian Industries, Damien's manufacturing crown jewel, was hemorrhaging. The call on its debt, orchestrated by Finch through a labyrinthine chain of obliging creditors, had been the first domino. Then, the whispers Finch had seeded about Meridian's solvency, nurtured by carefully leaked analyst reports, bloomed into full-blown panic. Investors, smelling blood in the water, fled. Blackwood Global stock plummeted like a stone dropped from one of Damien's own unfinished towers. Finch stood beside me, a silent sentinel. He didn't gloat. Victory for him was merely the successful execution of a plan. He handed me a single sheet of paper, crisp and heavy with finality. The notification of acquisition. Aurora Holdings, one of our most opaque shells, now held a controlling interest in Blackwood Global. My signature, practiced until it flowed with cold certainty, graced the bottom. The brass pocket watch rested on the desk beside it, its steady tick-tick-tick the only sound in the room besides the frantic murmur of the news anchor, detailing the unprecedented collapse and the questionable leadership decisions of CEO Damien Blackwood. "It's done, Miss Vance," Finch stated, his voice devoid of inflection, yet the gravity of the moment hung thick in the air. "The special shareholders meeting to formalize the board transition is scheduled for next week. Blackwood is scrambling. His attempts to secure emergency financing have failed. The vultures are circling." I picked up the pocket watch. Its familiar weight, warmed by my palm, was an anchor. I wound it once, the tiny clicks echoing the decisive snap of the trap closing. Time reveals all. My mother's words, etched onto the watch, felt less like an inscription and more like prophecy fulfilled. The ledger in my mind, filled with the cold accounting of betrayal, humiliation, and stolen years, balanced at last, not with forgiveness, but with reclamation. "There's the Children's Hope Charity Gala tonight," Finch added, almost as an afterthought. Blackwood is confirmed to attend. Damage control, projecting stability amidst the turmoil. A cold smile touched my lips, fleeting and devoid of warmth. Stability. The irony was exquisite. The gala was an event I would have attended as Damien's obligatory +1, a ghost in designer chiffon. Now, it was the perfect stage, not for a grand entrance, but for a quiet unveiling, a revelation delivered not with a shout, but with the devastating weight of silence. "I believe I'll attend, Mr. Finch," I said, my voice calm, almost serene, as myself. The grand ballroom of the historic Rutherford Hotel pulsed with a frantic, brittle energy. Crystal chandeliers showered light over a sea of sequins and silk, but the usual air of smug celebration was laced with something else, a predatory curiosity, the scent of a wounded beast. Conversations were hushed, eyes darted, and the forced laughter rang hollow. Damien Blackwood's empire was crumbling in real time, and the city's elite had gathered not just to donate, but to witness the spectacle. I arrived alone, not early, not late. My dress was not crimson, not designed to scream for attention. It was deep midnight blue, simple in its cut, elegant in its restraint. My mother's pearls, cool and luminous against my skin, were my only jewelry. No diamonds, just layers of quiet strength, accrued over time. The single perfect crimson rose from my rooftop terrace, was pinned discreetly at my shoulder, its velvety petals a silent declaration of resilience. The pocket watch nestled in the small clutch bag, its steady ticking a private metronome keeping time with my heartbeat. Entering the ballroom felt like stepping onto a stage. Heads turned, whispers rippled outwards. Elena Blackwood, here? Now? The discarded wife, walking into the heart of her ex-husband's public unraveling. I felt their gazes, pitying, curious, morbidly fascinated. I kept my chin level, my expression smooth as sea glass. I wasn't here for them. I was here for him. He stood near the center of the room, a diminished figure, trying to project his usual aura of invincibility. Damien was impeccably dressed, but the strain showed. Deep grooves bracketed his mouth, his eyes held a hunted look beneath their practiced intensity. He held a tumbler of whiskey too tightly. Celeste stood beside him, a vision in shimmering silver, but her beauty seemed brittle, painted on. Her smile was too wide, her eyes darting nervously, scanning the room like a cornered animal. The diamond bracelets on her wrist caught the light, flashing with a desperate, gaudy brightness that seemed almost vulgar against the backdrop of impending ruin. They're diamonds, I thought, still glittering like ice, but melting fast under the heat of their own making. I didn't approach immediately. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, accepting a glass of champagne I wouldn't drink, nodding politely at vague acquaintances whose expressions shifted from surprise to awkward sympathy. I observed, Damien held court, but his audience was thinner, their attention wavering. His voice, when I caught snippets, was sharper, more defensive than commanding. He was spinning a narrative of temporary setbacks, blaming market volatility, unreliable partners, anything but his own hubris. Celeste spotted me first, her gaze locked onto me across the crowded room, her painted smile freezing, then twisting into something ugly. Recognition flared, followed by pure venomous hatred. She leaned into Damien, whispering urgently, her crimson nails digging into his arm. He followed her gaze. Our eyes met. His expression flickered, surprise, then irritation, then a dawning, uncomfortable confusion. Why was I here? What did I want? The dutiful, oblivious ex-facade had shielded him from considering me a factor in his downfall. My presence now, calm and composed amidst his chaos, was an anomaly he couldn't compute. He extricated himself from his dwindling circle, and strode towards me, Celeste hovering a step behind, her eyes narrowed to slits. The murmur around us dipped, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. The vultures paused their circling, sensing fresh meat. Elena, Damien's voice was low, tight with suppressed anger, and something else. Fear? What are you doing here? He scanned my face, searching for cracks, for tears, for the broken woman he expected. Finding only calm resolve seemed to unsettle him further. Supporting a worthy cause, Damien, I replied, my voice level, carrying just enough to be heard by the closest onlookers. Children's hope, remember, a charity you used to champion. The subtle barb landed, his jaw tightened. This isn't the time or place for, he began, his tone dismissive, trying to regain control. For what?
I asked mildly, tilting my head. For civility, for acknowledging the world beyond your crumbling spreadsheets. A flush crept up his neck. Don't be absurd, he snapped, his control fraying. You have no idea what you're talking about. This is a complex situation, manipulated by rivals who saw the cracks you chose to ignore. I finished for him, my gaze steady, who understood that empires built on ego and exploitation have weak foundations. The quiet certainty in my voice cut through his bluster. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine confusion mixing with the anger. How does she know? Celeste couldn't contain herself any longer. She stepped forward, her silver gown hissing like an angry serpent. Her voice, when it came, was a low, venomous hiss, meant only for my ears, yet carrying in the sudden hush. Enjoying the show, gold digger? The hated label, spat with all the contempt she could muster. Crawling back now his money's gone? Pathetic. Her diamond bracelet flashed as she gestured dismissively. You were always just dead weight, a nobody. The insult hung in the air, familiar and poisonous. The room seemed to hold its breath. Damien watched me, a strange tension in his posture, not defending me, not reprimanding her, just waiting for the expected collapse, the tears, the public humiliation that would somehow distract from his own. I didn't look at Celeste. I kept my eyes fixed on Damien. The years of silent endurance, the sting of betrayal, the crushing weight of being unseen, unfurled within me, not as rage, but as a profound, icy clarity. The gold digger accusation, Celeste's final desperate barb, crystallized the moment. It wasn't just about Damien anymore. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself they had tried to diminish. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my clutch bag. My fingers brushed the cool brass of the pocket watch. Time reveals all. I withdrew not the watch, but the single sheet of paper Finch had given me. The notification of acquisition. I held it out to Damien, not with a flourish, but with the quiet finality of a judge passing sentence. He stared at it, uncomprehending for a second. His gaze dropped to the document, scanned the dense legal text, the damning figures, the name Aurora Holdings. His eyes widened, then narrowed, disbelief warring with dawning horror. His face drained of color, leaving a sickly pallor. His hand trembled slightly as he took the paper, his knuckles white where he gripped it. What is this? He rasped, his voice barely a whisper, stripped of all its former power. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine, not for the wife he'd discarded, but for the architect of his ruin. The realization crashed over him, brutal and absolute. The rivals, the manipulators, it was me. The woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant, as a gold digger, had been the patient spider weaving the web that ensnared him. It's ownership, Damien, I said, my voice clear, calm, carrying effortlessly in the tomb-like silence of the ballroom. Time's up. The words were simple, devastating, not shouted, not hissed, but stated as immutable fact. Time reveals all. I didn't need to say more. The document in his shaking hand spoke volumes. The pallor of his skin, the utter devastation in his eyes as the full magnitude of his mistake, underestimating me, betraying me, dismissing my mother's legacy, hit him, was its own proclamation. The silence deepened, thick with shock and morbid fascination. Celeste, momentarily forgotten, snatched the paper from Damien's limp grasp. Her eyes scanned it, her painted face contorting in disbelief, then raw panic. Her gaze snapped to me, the venom replaced by pure animal terror. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The diamond bracelets on her wrist suddenly looked like shackles. Her status, her power, her entire identity built on Damien's wealth, gone, bought out by the woman she'd called a gold digger. The grotesque irony was a physical blow. She swayed, clutching the document like a life raft made of lead, her face ashen. My gaze swept past them, beyond the wreckage of their world. Across the crowded room, near a potted palm, stood Liam Reed. He wasn't staring at the spectacle, he was looking at me. His gray eyes held no pity, no morbid curiosity. Instead, there was a quiet intensity, a profound understanding, and something else, respect. A silent acknowledgement of the strength it took to stand here, calm amidst the storm I had summoned. Our eyes met for a fleeting electric moment. No words, just a connection forged in shared understanding, a recognition of quiet power wielded with precision. He gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible,
a salute from one builder to another. Then he turned, melting back into the crowd, leaving me with the echo of that silent solidarity. The spell broke. A murmur surged through the ballroom, rising to a crescendo of shocked whispers and speculative chatter. Cameras flashed. Journalists who'd been covering the charity event suddenly smelled a far bigger story. Damien remained frozen, staring at the paper Celeste had dropped, looking utterly shattered. The arrogant CEO replaced by a hollow shell. Celeste had vanished, swallowed by the crowd, fleeing the exposure she dreaded most, being revealed as the ultimate opportunist with nothing left to cling to. I didn't wait for the fallout. My purpose here was served. The revelation was complete. Turning, I walked away from the center of the storm. The crowd parted before me, not out of deference, but out of stunned awe, and perhaps a flicker of fear. The path to the grand exit stretched before me, lined with faces reflecting a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, glee, pity, calculation. I met none of their eyes. My gaze was fixed ahead, my head held high, the scent of the crimson rose at my shoulder, a sweet defiant counterpoint to the acrid tang of Damien's disgrace. The cacophony of the gala, the gasps, the whispers, the frantic voices of reporters, faded behind me as I pushed through the heavy brass doors, into the cool, quiet expanse of the hotel lobby. The silence here was different, not the suffocating silence of the penthouse, nor the ancient silence of Seabridge. It was the profound, resonant silence of ground reclaimed. The ruins of Damien's empire lay behind me, smoldering in the ballroom's gilded cage. My own ground, purchased not with gold dug from another's claim, but unearthed from the deep well of inherited strength, and forged in the fires of betrayal, felt solid beneath my feet, unshakable. The pocket watch in my bag ticked steadily, no longer counting down to vengeance, but marking the first seconds of a new, uncharted time. I walked out into the city night alone, the cool air washing over me, carrying not the scent of decay, but the faint hopeful fragrance of the rose pinned to my shoulder, blooming defiantly against the darkness.
Chapter 4. The city's roar felt distant now, filtered through the vibrant green canopy of my rooftop sanctuary. Spring had surrendered fully to early summer, and the transformation was breathtaking. Where once weeds choked despair, life thrived. Emerald leaves glistened after a morning shower. Fragrant clusters of blush pink, buttery yellow, and deep crimson roses bloomed with abandon, their petals soft velvet against the urban skyline. The stubborn cane that had borne that first defiant bud now stood tall and proud, laden with perfect, blood-red blooms. The scent was intoxicating, sweet, complex, layered. It wasn't just the absence of decay, it was the triumphant presence of life, nurtured back from the brink. Tending this garden had become my liturgy, a daily ritual of quiet defiance and renewal. Resilience, I'd learned, wasn't a single dramatic act. It was the daily tending, the careful pruning of dead wood, both literal and metaphorical, the patient nurturing of fragile new growth. It was the quiet rhythm of rebuilding, brick by brick, bloom by bloom. Each thorn avoided, each weed pulled, each bud coaxed open felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself, buried under years of Damien's sterile grandeur and Celeste's venom. The dismantling was complete. The revelation at the gala had been the earthquake. The aftershocks were handled with Finch's chilling efficiency. The special shareholders' meeting was a formality conducted in a boardroom devoid of Damien's bluster. He was ousted. Aurora Holdings, under my direction via Finch, didn't burn the empire to the ground. That felt too much like Damien's scorched earth tactics. Instead, we initiated a meticulous, almost surgical restructuring. Viridian Industries, the over-leveraged heart of his troubles, was spun off and sold to a competitor known for ethical labor practices, a move subtly praised in the financial press. The vanity projects, Elysium Tower's skeletal frame haunting the skyline, the floundering Nexus incubator, were either sold for parts or quietly shuttered, their glass and steel recycled into something useful. The core of Blackwood Global, stripped of its toxic debt and Damien's ego-driven bloat, was refocused, streamlined, infused with a modicum of the quiet, sustainable principles my mother might have approved of. It was no longer his monument. It was a functional asset in a diverse portfolio, managed by professionals who reported to Finch, who reported to me. The name Blackwood remained on the building, a necessary legal fiction, but the soul of it was irrevocably changed, cleansed. The weight of it felt less like ownership and more like stewardship. Damien's attempts at contact were pathetic flares in the dark, starkly contrasting the quiet strength emanating from Finch's reports. Angry emails demanding explanations deleted unread, frantic voicemails pleading for a meeting, blaming rivals, the market, even Celeste erased. Finally, desperate letters delivered by courier, scrawled on expensive thick-stock stationery that felt greasy to the touch, veering wildly between threats and abject pleas for mercy, for a second chance, not with me, but with his company. They smelled faintly of desperation and stale whiskey, the scent clinging unpleasantly to the paper. I handed them unopened to my lawyer, Sylvia Chen, a woman whose calm efficiency mirrored Finch's. Silence was the most potent rebuke. His world had crumbled because he'd built it on sand and betrayal. Mine was being built on bedrock. Let him choke on the dust of his own making. Watching his frantic, impotent rage from a distance was its own quiet satisfaction, a confirmation that the ground beneath me truly was unshakable now. Celeste vanished, completely, no trace in the society pages, no whispers at the remaining events I occasionally attended, always on my own terms now. She'd been a parasite clinging to Damien's wealth. Without it she had no substance, no identity beyond the gaudy diamonds and the venomous sneer. Her disappearance was a footnote, irrelevant. The label gold diggers she'd hurled now felt like an ironic epitaph on her own shallow grave. The universe had a sense of poetic justice, cold and clean. My focus shifted, naturally, inevitably. Finch managed the financial engine with seamless precision, but the purpose of the wealth needed redefining, aligning with the woman I was becoming, not the one I had been. My mother's legacy wasn't just a weapon honed in Seabridge, it was a profound responsibility. I found myself drawn, like a compass needle finding true north, to causes she'd quietly supported, but never flaunted. Significant grants flowed to women's shelters, providing not just beds but resources for rebuilding shattered lives. Funding bolstered conservation groups fiercely protecting old-growth forests, sanctuaries of quiet resilience, like the one she'd cultivated within me. Scholarships were established for young women pursuing botany and sustainable agriculture, fields that honored the earth and its quiet wisdom. The ledger in my mind, once filled with the cold calculus of vengeance, column after column of slights, betrayals, and the meticulous financial steps to counter them, was now a different kind of accounting, resources allocated to nurture, protect, and empower. The satisfaction was deep, quiet, fundamentally different from the cold thrill of the takedown. It felt like roots digging deep into fertile soil, anchoring me in something larger than myself. It felt like honoring Elena Vance, in the only way that truly mattered. The rooftop garden remained my touchstone, my private chapel. My hands, once pricked and bloodied by thorns as I wrestled with neglect, were now skilled and sure. Calluses marked my palms, badges of honest labor. I knew each plant intimately, the climbing rose that craved the southern sun, the shy clematis, preferring dappled shade, the lavender that thrived on benign neglect. The scent of damp earth and roses after watering was my balm, a sensory anchor to the present. One bright morning, kneeling beside a particularly vigorous new-dawned climber, its soft pink blooms releasing their delicate perfume, I heard the soft chime of the terrace door. Knock knock. Liam Reed's voice was warm, carrying easily over the subdued hum of the city below. He stood framed in the doorway, sunlight catching the dust motes dancing around him like benevolent spirits. He wore dark jeans, faded at the knees, and a soft-looking charcoal gray sweater, a rolled set of architectural blueprints tucked securely under his arm. His gray eyes scanned the blooming terrace, a genuine appreciative smile, lighting his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Elena, it's incredible, truly. A world away up here, it breathes, a familiar warmth, different from the sun's caress, spread through me, starting low in my chest. Liam had become a quiet, steadying constant in the landscape of my new life. Our paths had crossed deliberately after the gala's seismic shift, a tentative email from me thanking him again, for the scarf now cleaned, carefully folded, and resting in a drawer like a cherished talisman, mentioning my burgeoning interest in supporting historic preservation. He'd responded with characteristic warmth and professionalism, devoid of the sycophancy or morbid curiosity others might have shown. The shared project, restoring the crumbling but beautiful old Lyceum Theatre, a beloved community landmark threatened by decay, had become our bridge. My funds provided the means, his vision provided the soul, our shared passion for rescuing something beautiful from neglect provided the foundation. "Thank you, Liam," I said, rising smoothly, brushing loose soil from the knees of my worn gardening trousers. "It's been a labor of rediscovery." I gestured towards the wrought iron bistro table nestled amidst a profusion of pale pink Zephyrine Drouin roses, their thornless canes a welcome reprieve. "Coffee, just brewed." "Always," he grinned, his smile easy and unguarded, as he carefully set the blueprints down on the clean tabletop. He moved through the space, not as a guest, but with an architect's innate appreciation for harmony and form, his fingers lightly brushing a velvety crimson bloom of Minstead wood. "This one, it's got character, survived the wilderness." His gaze met mine, holding a depth of understanding that went beyond horticulture. "The toughest of the lot," I confirmed, pouring rich dark coffee into sturdy mugs. "Nearly strangled, starved, forgotten, but it refused to die, just needed light, care, and time." I handed him a mug, our fingers brushing briefly, sending a small pleasant shock through the quiet morning air. "Resilient," he murmured, the word hanging between us, weighted with unspoken acknowledgement. He knew fragments of my past, gleamed from unavoidable headlines, and the quiet gaps in my history he was too respectful to probe. He never pried, never offered empty platitudes about strength or moving on. He simply saw the woman tending her garden, funding his passion project with quiet conviction. His respect was for who I was now, not the shadow of what I had been defined by. It was a gift, profound in its simplicity. We settled at the table, the blueprints unfurled across the surface, dense with precise lines, notes in Liam's neat hand, and splashes of watercolor indicating material palettes. His enthusiasm was infectious, a tangible energy as he pointed out details, restoring the intricate original plasterwork here, sourcing sustainable, reclaimed timber for the stage extension there, creating accessible spaces, woven seamlessly into the historic fabric without compromising the theater's soul. His finger traced a complex junction on the plan, where a new support beam needed to integrate with the old brickwork. "This corner, it's the trickiest part of the whole restoration, needs light desperately to open up the backstage area, but the existing structure is so dense, so stubbornly resistant." He looked up, his gaze thoughtful, seeking my understanding. "Like that alcove in the old Carnegie Library we toured last week. Remember? Buried treasure, hidden in shadow." I did. A dark forgotten space, near the periodicals section, thick with dust and disuse, that he'd immediately seen potential in, sketching solutions on a napkin over lukewarm tea. "It needed opening up," I agreed, sipping my coffee, the warmth spreading through me. "But carefully, respecting the bones, not forcing it, just persuading the light in." "Exactly," he nodded, a spark of connection igniting in his eyes, brighter than the morning sun. "Not ripping it out, not dominating it, just creating the space for the light to find its way in." His hand rested near mine on the edge of the blueprint, the rough pad of his thumb just grazing the back of my knuckle. Our fingers didn't fully touch, but the proximity sent a current through the quiet morning air, a silent communication. Flirtation with Liam wasn't witty banter or practiced charm, it was shared focus, a meeting of minds over blueprints and rose bushes. The unspoken acknowledgement held in a glance, the warmth in his voice when he said my name, low and deliberate. It was the way he carefully, almost unconsciously, pushed a stray tendril of hair, blown by the breeze away from my face without a word, his touch feather light, and lingering just a fraction too long, leaving a trail of warmth on my temple. It was the solid, quiet presence he offered, a counterpoint to the solitude I'd grown accustomed to, a presence that didn't demand but simply was, steady and reassuring. Later that week, we walked through the echoing dusty grandeur of the Lyceum itself, hard hats perched on our heads, the scent of old wood, plaster dust, and potential thick in the cool air. The connection forged on the sunny terrace, deepened in the cathedral-like space. Sunlight, weak but determined, streamed through the high, arched windows Liam planned to restore to their original multi-paned glory. He stopped before the soaring, intricately carved but sadly damaged proscenium arch, the heart of the stage. Scaffolding embraced it like careful guardians. "Look at the craftsmanship," he said, his voice hushed with reverence, echoing slightly in the vastness. He pointed to a section where cherubs and acanthus leaves intertwined, hand-carved, late 19th century, we think. Each leaf, each flourish, it's art, pure artistry poured into wood. He turned to me, his eyes alight with a passionate fire that transformed his usually calm features. "We can save most of it, stabilize, conserve, repair. It deserves to be seen again, to live again, to inspire." His passion wasn't just for bricks and mortar, it was for the stories these walls held, the magic they could conjure anew. Standing there, amidst the skeletal beginnings of restoration, the sounds of careful chiseling, and distant conversation drifting down from the scaffolding, I felt a profound resonance vibrate deep within me. This theater, neglected for decades, its beauty hidden beneath grime, pigeon droppings, and layers of ill-advised paint, it mirrored my own journey, not destroyed in a fiery climax, but patiently meticulously restored, piece by fragile piece, given new purpose, given light. Liam wasn't just rebuilding a structure, he was honoring its history while courageously forging its future, believing in its inherent worth even when obscured. The quiet understanding that passed between us then, amidst the dust and the promise, wasn't just about architecture or preservation, it was a recognition of shared values, a silent pact built on respect for the scars of the past, and an unwavering hope for what could with care and patience bloom anew. "Like this one did," I said softly, my voice barely more than a whisper yet carrying clearly in the resonant space. I touched the single smooth pearl at my throat, my mother's quiet strength, then gestured vaguely upwards, towards the light filtering through the dirty glass, but meaning so much more. The terrace, the roses, myself, this fragile, hopeful thing growing between Liam and me, a subtle gesture, laden with meaning I knew only he might fully grasp, a testament to the unspoken language we were building. He held my gaze, the noise of distant construction fading into insignificance. A slow warm smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes, crinkling the corners, lighting them from within. He didn't need words, he simply nodded, a deep, unspoken accord settling between us like dust motes finding their level in a sunbeam. His hand brushed mine, as he reached to point out a detail on a crumbling, ornate column capital. Not an accident, I was certain, the intention clear in the deliberate slowness of the movement. The contact was brief, electric, a spark in the cool dimness, a silent promise, hanging palpable in the dust-moted sunlight. It spoke of shared purpose, of burgeoning affection, of a future being carefully constructed, together. The final piece of closure came not with Liam, but alone, a pilgrimage necessary for my soul. I took the train back to Seabridge, the rhythmic clatter soothing, the landscape softening from urban grit to coastal wildness, not as a fugitive fleeing a gilded cage, but as a woman returning to her roots, grounded and whole. The cottage, whispering pines, welcomed me with the familiar profound sigh of the sea, and the whispering pines, salt, damp earth, and wild rosemary scented the air. The ocean roared its eternal, unchanging song below the cliffs. This time, the ache of my mother's absence was tempered by a deep, swelling gratitude, by a newfound, bone-deep understanding of the legacy she'd woven in silence. I climbed the familiar, winding path to the small windswept cemetery, perched on the bluffs, the one place where the sea's voice was clearest. Elena Vance's headstone was simple granite, unadorned, etched only with her name and dates, no grand epitaph, just the quiet endurance of stone facing the relentless elements. I knelt on the springy grass, the dampness seeping through the knees of my trousers, just as it had on the cold penthouse terrace long ago. But this dampness was clean, elemental, life-giving. I placed a single perfect crimson rose, a sibling to the first defiant bloom from my rooftop terrace, against the cool gray stone. "Hello, Mama," I whispered, the wind catching my words, carrying them out to sea. "I brought you a bloom from the wilderness. It survived, thrived, actually." I traced the cool clean-cut letters of her name with my fingertip. "I understand now," I continued, my voice gaining strength, carried by the salt breeze. "The pearls, the watch, the quiet building, the secrecy. You weren't hiding weakness, were you? You were hoarding strength, protecting it."
cultivating it, for yourself, and, my throat tightened momentarily, and for me, the pocket watch, warm from my grasp, felt alive in my palm. I didn't need to wind it here. The relentless rhythmic crash of the waves against the rocks below marked time, with a primordial certainty. You taught me to hide my strength, to keep it safe, quiet, layered. Now, I paused, the profound truth settling deep within me, as solid as the granite beneath my knees. Now I understand how to wield it quietly, like you did. Not just to break, Mama. I looked out at the vast, churning expanse of the ocean, feeling an immense sense of peace. To build. The sea breeze, sharp and clean, carried the mingled scent of the single crimson rose, and the wild yellow gorse blooming on the cliffs. It felt like an embrace, timeless and accepting. The heavy ledger of pain and vengeance was finally closed, balanced not by destruction, but by creation, the vibrant garden reclaiming concrete, the shelters offering sanctuary, the scholarships nurturing futures, the Lyceum being coaxed back to life. The tentative, precious connection deepening with Liam. The gold digger accusation had been buried deep, forever silenced under the weight of my own unearthed, undeniable worth. I touched the pearls at my neck, cool and smooth, a constant reminder of layered strength, cultivated over time, then pressed my palm flat against the cool, enduring surface of her headstone, feeling its solidity, its permanence. Thank you, I breathed. The simplest, most profound words for the legacy of quiet resilience she'd bestowed. The wind sighed through the pines, a whispered benediction. Back in the city, the future unfurled like a new leaf, bright with possibility. Liam and I walked through the bustling, vibrant chaos of the Lyceum restoration site. Scaffolding climbed the walls like intricate lacework. The sounds of careful deconstruction and hopeful rebuilding filled the air. The chime of trowels, the whine of saws cutting precise angles, the low murmur of workers. We stood on what would become the new balcony level, overlooking the vast, open space of the stage, still skeletal but humming with potential. The late afternoon sun slanted dramatically through the high, newly cleaned, arched windows. Liam had fought so passionately to preserve, painting long golden rectangles on the dusty floor far below. Dust motes danced in the luminous beams like excited spirits. He pointed towards the magnificent proscenium arch, now carefully shrouded in protective white sheeting, looking like a sleeping giant. Workers perched on scaffolding, meticulously cleaned centuries of grime and paint from the intricate carvings beneath. See, his voice was thick with pride, anticipation, and a quiet awe. The light, the late afternoon sun hits it just there, across the top curve. When the sheeting comes off, when the stage lights eventually hit it, he trailed off, shaking his head slightly, overcome by the vision only he could fully see yet. It'll be magnificent. It'll sing. I looked at him, not at the shrouded arch. The golden sunlight caught the subtle silver threads woven through his dark hair, illuminated the focused passion burning in his clear gray eyes, and softened the lines of concentration on his face. He wasn't just showing me a building, he was sharing his vision, his heart laid bare in brick and timber and reclaimed stone. He was sharing the culmination of his own quiet resilience, his belief in restoring beauty against the odds. It already is, I said softly, meaning the potential shimmering in the dusty air, the beautiful process unfolding around us. The man beside me whose quiet strength mirrored my own. He turned, his gaze meeting mine, cutting through the ambient noise of the site. The clamor faded into a distant respectful hum. He didn't speak, he simply reached out, his hand rough from handling stone and wood, but infinitely gentle, and covered mine where it rested on the temporary metal railing. His thumb brushed slowly, deliberately, across my knuckles, a silent language speaking volumes of connection, deep respect, burgeoning partnership, and something else, something tender, vulnerable, and profoundly real growing in the fertile ground we'd both prepared. It wasn't a grand declaration shouted from the scaffolding, it was a quiet anchoring, a mutual recognition of the solid ground we stood on, ground reclaimed from ruin, rebuilt with care, and finally irrevocably ready to bear the weight of something new, fragile, enduring and deeply strong. His hand remained, warm and sure, a promise etched not in words, but in the simple profound act of holding on. Later, back on the rooftop terrace, under a sky deepening to indigo twilight, the city lights below sparkling like a field of fallen stars, I stood beside Liam. The roses released their richest, most complex evening perfume, a heady, intoxicating fragrance that mingled with the lingering warmth of the day. He slipped an arm around my waist, pulling me gently against his side. My head found the natural hollow of his shoulder. No words were needed. The shared silence was comfortable, deep, resonant with understanding, and the quiet hum of contentment. The pocket watch rested on the weathered wood of the bistro table, its brass face catching the last faint streaks of orange and pink in the western sky. I didn't feel the urge to wind it. Its familiar ticking, barely audible now, was no longer a countdown to vengeance, or a weapon of strategy. It was merely the steady, comforting pulse of time moving forward, a rhythm we were learning together, step by quiet step, into a future we were building, not breaking. I looked out over the vast, glittering expanse of the city I'd once viewed solely as Damien's kingdom, a gilded cage viewed from a sterile height. Now it was just a city, vibrant, flawed, endlessly complex, and full of possibilities, like life itself. My mother's pearls were cool and reassuring against my skin, a silent reminder of inherited strength. Liam's solid, warm presence at my side was an anchor, not a chain, a testament to connection found amidst the ruins. The crimson roses glowed like banked embers in the gathering dusk, symbols of fierce, quiet survival. The gold they accused me of digging for, I'd found it within, in the deep vein of quiet strength inherited from Elena Vance, in the resilience forged in the fires of betrayal, and tempered by patience, in the courage to choose nurturing over destruction, building over breaking. It had bought me something far more valuable than an empire, more precious than any diamond, my own unshakable ground. And standing here, breathing in the intoxicating scent of roses and the boundless promise of the future, feeling the steady beat of Liam's heart against my ear, I finally found the quiet, unflinching courage to let something real, something tender, vulnerable, and profoundly true, take root, grow, and blossom wildly in the fertile soil of my reclaimed life. I leaned into him, his arm tightening around me in silent answer, and together we watched the first brave stars pierce the vast, forgiving canvas of the night sky.